welcome to another episode of my top 5. In this episode I'll be looking at my 5 favourite 90s PC computer games. That's really granular. I'll explain why in a moment. I've got a couple of honourable mentions as well. So, just as a preamble, and as I sort of think through this, like the various decades and how much or little I played computer games, the 90s was definitely, for me, the time when I spent the most amount of time playing computer games. Probably, if I discount like arcade games, so obviously growing up, if we ever went to the coast and onto a pier, like Brighton Pier or anywhere like that, there'd obviously be various arcade games in the 70s. In terms of, personal gaming equipment, be that a PC or gaming system, or just PCs generally, I was just trying to think, like the first time was probably, well, in terms of the first time I played on what might be called a personal computer, so this would have been around the time of the Commodore PET. Our school school I went to had a personal computer, and this it was almost actually getting into the 80s by the time they had it. So they had the Forerunner, they had the Commodore PET, and that would have had, I remember that having Frogger on it. So that was probably the first PC game I played on some form of PC type thing. During the 80s, I did own a Nintendo, and so I obviously bought gaming cartridges for that. So that was my sort of go-to platform in the 80s, was the Nintendo. And then as we came into the 90s, sometime around about, I think must have been 93, 94, I bought my first personal computer. Prior to that, also in the 80s, I remember we had, in the lab that I worked in, we had a DEC mini computer, and someone had bought back a copy of, I think on that machine it was called Mines of Moria. It's that sort of ASCII based dungeon crawler. I think it's called something like Anger Band on various other systems. And yeah, we had a real problem in the lab stopping the techs from playing that all the time. In fact, the senior tech at the time asked me to actually uninstall it from our lab deck at one point because it got so bad, with people basically playing Mines of Moria when they should have been doing lab work. So yeah, in the 80s, mainly used gaming systems, but we did have access to PCs at work, and Mines of Moria was one. I remember there being like one of those text-based adventure games as well, but I just can't remember what it was called. Anyway, so we roll into the 90s and I get my first PC. It was a Amstrad 486. And the place I worked at, the guy I worked across from, we like shared our desks were like face to face, and we both worked as contract chasers. And he'd heard that I just bought a PC, and he said, "Oh, you should go out and get. There's some really good games for PCs now." And he recommended to me that the second choice on this list. I'm going through chronologically. But another one that he'd mentioned was Doom. And of course I'd not played computer games on a PC for a long while, so I didn't know what to expect. And I was just completely blown away by the graphics and just the quality of the game that Doom was, this first-person shooter. And so that was my sort of gateway drug, if you like, into 90s PC computing, was Doom. And if anybody who was gaming at the time will probably know, particularly, I'm assuming the same in North America as it was in the UK, but in the UK a lot of computer magazines came with, initially with floppies on the front, but then CDs, and they'd often have the sort of shareware versions of games where that was the case on them. So in the case of Doom, you got to play that first story or that first level, the one of the three. I did actually go out and buy the full version of Doom, and then subsequently Doom 2. And with several of these games you'll see I mention, I did go on and play the series. So with this one I played Doom, and then Doom 2, and then played Quake, but by then we're getting into the 2000s. But certainly with Doom and Doom 2, that was still in the 90s. And I wasted endless hours of my free time playing this. And that came out when, I say 93, yeah. So probably I locked into this around 94. Around the same time. So this came out sometime around 93. Ultima Underworld 2, Labyrinth of Worlds. And this was another one that was recommended to me by my work colleague at the time. And this one I spent even more hours on. Actually, I forgot the funny story about Doom. So, as was the case at the time in the 90s, I couldn't really afford to go on holiday. So when I took time off from work, I did a number of things. I was lucky enough to live near Ashdown Forest, so I'd go and do a lot of walking. Other things I'd do is I'd listen to music a lot. Have a week listening to music or a week reading. But one time I remember I took a week off and played Doom for a week solid. And was it? I think I'm right with this. If my memory's right. There were also 2 albums that I was listening to around this time I was playing Doom excessively, which was His and Hers by Pulp and a Booyah Tribe album of the time, and I can't remember the name of the title, and those 2 albums around that time remind me of this. But one thing I started to get with Doom is like aural hallucinations. Through playing it so much, the imps in it used to make this oinking sound, and I could hear that in my head when I wasn't playing it and when I go to sleep at night. And the other thing you get a lot when you play these first person shooters is that weird thing when you close your eyes and you've still got the motion in your head. Yeah, that's the first time I experienced that. Anyway, I wanted to mention that because which I didn't have the problem with this game. This is a first-person role-playing video game, but the pace is a little bit slower. So this is the second one in this Ultima Underworld series. Also, there's a wider series here, the Ultima series, and several years later I bought, there was a CD came out which had all the actual Ultima series on it, right back to the original Ultima 1, which was a dungeon crawler type thing, and yeah, very, very basic graphics. But these two, Ultima Underworld 1, Ultima Underworld 2, yeah, at the time, I mean, I've not had a chance to look at this probably since the 2000s, so it'd be interesting to see what I think of the graphics now. But at the time, it just seemed incredible. And it just went on and on and on, seemingly endlessly. Another one that did the rounds a little bit of work. So where I worked, we were primarily using, working at that point as a contract chaser, and then on an internal EPOS support, electronic point of sale, doing support for tills and sort of PC based apps which are running on, because all the tills are PC based. Now the vast majority of the office were using dumb terminals. They were just using like I think it was an ICL, a really old client server setup. But we had access to PCs which ran an emulator in the background, so you could switch over to the ICL terminal. But it did mean we had access to a full DOS machine. So not surprisingly, in the course of work, someone must have tripped and, accidentally installed it. We had both Doom installed and Warcraft, Orcs and Humans. I believe this was another one that turned up. I don't know if it was via shareware or not. I know I bought the full version of it, and then subsequently the second and the third, so Warcraft 2 and Warcraft 3, the sequels. With this one, it was always that help, we're being attacked. That little soundbite, I think, on this one, that always sort of stuck in my head, if I've got that right. And of course, this was my first exposure to a resource management program, where you were building up resources through mining and cutting down lumber, and then repelling invasions. And you could play from both sides of the coin. You could play either as an orc and then as a human. Humans and orcs. I can't remember which way around it was. Again, it's been a while since I picked this one up. But yeah, another great waste of time. I think this one I didn't quite waste as much time as I did with either Doom or Ultima Underworld, mainly because I was doing the Open University at this point, so I was pretty careful in how I spent my free time, because quite a lot of it had to be spent studying, because I was working as well, so I was maybe not quite as much time as I had for Doom or Ultima Underworld. Then this was my next big thing I got into, was Dungeon Keeper. So this was 97 this came out. The funny thing about this is, at the time, actually my old PC, which had been fine running Doom and Ultima Underworld and Warcraft, just wasn't going to run Dungeon Keeper. But I bought it anyway because at that point I'd switched jobs and I was working as a programmer on accounting systems, and I had access to quite a powerful PC at the time. So during lunch hours and outside hours, I used to play Dungeon Keeper on my work PC. because I couldn't play it at my PC at home. But this was great. This is it's interesting to play the baddie, and again, there's a degree of resource management in this. But again, it was nice because I'd not played anything like this before, and I got reasonably hooked on this. Again, fortunately, because I initially wasn't able to play this at home, I was still carrying on with my postgrad studies at that point, and so I couldn't. I didn't interfere too much with my academic studies. And then the good thing was, by the time I'd finished my academic studies, I got big into Starcraft. So this came out, what was it, 1998. Was released on Windows. I bought it a little time after. By then I had actually access to a laptop which would comfortably play this and my various versions of Dungeon Keeper. Because I'd purchased quite a nice laptop, so I could. Initially, it was bought so that when I was staying away from home, out doing, I was a bit of when I was programming, I was a bit of a road dog for a while and stayed in various hotels. I obviously had to continue with my studies, and so I'd bought this laptop so I could write up my dissertations and my coursework actually. And so after I finished all that, I was able to have my laptop over to playing more games. At that point also I started in business myself as well, so it was rather convenient having a laptop. But yeah, this got the shit played out of it, I think is a technical term. Another great resource game. I'll include the links to all of these in the descriptions, because I'm not going to talk about much about the actual games, but just my memories around them. And these two I got exposed to through just reading the computer magazines at the time. The first three was through people at work recommending them, but these two were definitely just through my own endeavours. I think by then I was buying, whatever was available in the UK. I'm trying to remember, what was it, PC Plus, I think, and Computer Magazine were the two big. I used to buy them every week, so I was sort of finding out about the newest games and various other things. So those are my top 5 PC-based games from the 90s, and all of these, the key things with them is I played them like multiple times at the time. They were massive time soak, and I had to really ration myself, particularly with around this period where I was also doing academic studies at a fairly high level, at postgrad level. And this is always fatal if anybody that's ever tried to balance gaming with studies and a job will know. But I've got some honourable mentions. So around the time I was playing these, I became aware of this, which was Hand of Fate. Slightly different. I don't remember this cover at the time. I remember this artwork with the hand. And probably my first exposure to a point-and-click adventure game. And this was from 93, so around the same time period as Doom and Ultramar Underworld. And I did actually take this into work. This would have come out when I was still working on EPOS support, actually point of sale support. It's quite a short game actually. I seem to remember there's a couple of places where I really got stuck, and there's down here you sort of have this cauldron which you use to make magic potions, which help you as part of the problem solving. and you're picking up items that have been dropped and various other things. But it is a relatively time-wise a relatively short game. I don't remember. I think there was one point where I got stuck and did have to sort of look up online. But I think that was the only point. I think it was also praised because, some of these point and click adventure games, it was possible to get yourself into a position where, based on an earlier choice, you couldn't actually finish the game. My understanding was this wasn't the case with this game. And it used like, what was it called? Hub and spoke type arrangement, I think, where you went out, had to keep sort of going out places and then coming back. So you have to go and find things, and then you sort of go back again to where the actual problem needs to be solved to sort of unlock things from memory again. And it is a very long time since I've played these. If I hadn't mentioned it already, actually, I think all of these are available on GOG or what's the other one? Steam, or both of them. And then another honourable mention is Heretic. So this came out, 94? Oh, that's right, because this came out as as a shareware version. And then I remember buying the full version at some point. And when I went to look for it, I couldn't find it, or I had problems getting it to play on my machine. So I ended up just buying the series on Steam, because I did Heretic, I played Hexen and Hexen 2 as well, all of which I must have purchased. But this is underneath this. This is based on a modified version of the Doom engine. In fact, if you don't know already, you probably know that Starcraft is based on the the Warcraft engine, I believe. Let me just check that. Actually, maybe I've got that wrong, but that's what it felt like anyway. It definitely felt that it was. It had used, and certainly it was made by Blizzard. And the other thing, particularly with Dungeon Keeper, which was really interesting. Anybody that had this, I had this on CD. I don't know if it ever came out on discs, on regular discs or not. But on the CD, the nice thing was you could actually play the CD as a regular music CD, and it had all the cool soundtrack to go with it as well. And you could just play that on a regular CD player, which I really liked, because I really like the soundtrack to this. Nice ambient feel to it. If you like the sound of dripping dungeons. So there we have it. That's my top 5 favourite 90s PC games. We've got Doom, Ultra Underworld 2, Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, Dungeon Keeper, Starcraft, and a couple of honourable mentions, Legends of Kyrandia and Heretic. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I'll see you in the next video.